If you're over 65 and you've ever lain awake at 2 in the morning doing sums in your head, wondering whether your pension will actually see you through to the end, you are not alone, and you are not being foolish. Tonight, I want to sit with you for the next half hour and talk honestly about the 7 quiet signs that your pension might not stretch as far as you think. Number 4 is the one almost nobody talks about, because it isn't about money at all. It's about a phone call. And number 6 is the one that divides families more than any inheritance ever could. So stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll know exactly where you stand, and more importantly, what you can still do about it. Before we begin, let me say this clearly. This isn't a video meant to frighten you. There is a difference between fear and awareness, and awareness is a gift you can act on. Most of the people in the stories I'm about to share with you didn't lose their financial security in one dramatic moment. It slipped away in small, ordinary decisions made with the best of intentions by people no different from you or me. So take a breath, put the kettle on if you'd like, and let's look at this together, calmly, the way old friends talk about the things that matter. It also helps to remember something we don't say often enough. Your pension was never meant to be a test you either pass or fail. It's a tool built by decades of your own work, meant to serve you. Tools sometimes need adjusting. That's not failure. That's simply what tending to something well looks like at any age. I've spent a long time listening to people in exactly this stage of life, and one thing has become very clear to me. The ones who sleep soundly at night are rarely the ones with the largest pension pots. They're the ones who understand clearly and honestly exactly what they have, exactly where it comes from, and exactly who they can turn to if something ever went wrong. That kind of peace can be built at any age with any pension starting today. So let's begin. Number 1. You've stopped checking your statements. Margaret, from a quiet village outside Leeds, told me something that stuck with me. She said, "For years I opened every bank letter the day it arrived. Then one year I just stopped. It wasn't laziness. It was a kind of quiet fatigue that comes with age. The letters started to feel repetitive. The numbers started to blur. And so she let them pile up on the kitchen table, unopened, for months at a time. When her daughter finally sat down with her to go through everything, they discovered that a small private pension Margaret had paid into decades earlier had been quietly eaten away by management fees for years. Fees that, had she noticed sooner, she could have queried or moved elsewhere. It wasn't a fortune, but it was hundreds of pounds a year, gone, simply because nobody was looking. What made it harder for Margaret wasn't the money itself. It was the quiet guilt afterwards, the feeling that she should have known better. But here is something worth saying plainly. Providers count on this. Fee structures, buried in dense paragraphs, annual stints written in language that seems designed to be skimmed rather than read. None of that is your fault. The system was not built with kindness toward the tired eye or the busy afternoon. Here is the truth. Pensions are not set and forget the way we were told they would be. Providers change their fee structures. Interest rates shift. Annuity terms get renegotiated in the small print. If you've gone more than 6 months without opening a statement or logging into your pension provider's portal, that is sign number 1. The fix is gentle, not dramatic. Set a date, perhaps the first Sunday of every month, and simply look. You don't need to understand everything. You just need to look. If a phrase confuses you, write it down and ask your provider directly, or bring it to someone you trust the next time they visit. There is no such thing as a silly question about your own money. Number 2, you're relying on one single source of income. There's an old saying that applies just as well to money as it does to farming: never put all your eggs in one basket. And yet, so many of us do exactly that with retirement. Frank, a retired bus driver from Sheffield, built his entire plan around the state pension and a small works pension from 30 years of service. It seemed solid. It seemed reasonable. But when his works pension provider was absorbed into a larger scheme after a company merger, the payout terms shifted slightly, and Frank found himself 6% short of what he'd calculated for his monthly budget. 6% doesn't sound like much until it's the difference between heating your whole house in January or just the one room. Frank told me the hardest part wasn't the shortfall itself. It was that he'd never imagined he'd need a plan B, because for 30 years, a plan A had always been enough. That's the trap with single-income planning. It isn't reckless in the moment it's made. It only reveals itself as fragile years later, when circumstances change in ways nobody could have predicted at the time. The lesson isn't that you did anything wrong by trusting your pension provider. Most of us have no real alternative but to trust the system we're given. The lesson is that resilience comes from diversity. If any part of your income is a single point of failure, one pension, one provider, one investment, that is sign number 2. Where you can, having even a small secondary cushion, whether that's modest savings, a part-time hobby that brings in a little extra, or ISA income, gives you room to breathe if one piece of the puzzle shifts beneath you. Even something as modest as 50 pounds a month set quietly aside becomes over several years a genuine cushion for the unexpected. And diversity doesn't only mean money sitting in different accounts. It can mean a skill you still practice, a small craft you sell at a local market, a spare room let out for part of the year. Anything that means your well-being doesn't rest entirely on a single check arriving on a single date each month. Number 3, you're still paying off debt in your 70s. This one carries no shame with it, because the world has changed enormously since many of us took out our first mortgage. Housing costs, family loans, helping children or grandchildren onto the property ladder. These things weren't as common or as expensive 40 years ago. But Walter, a retired schoolteacher, found himself at 73, still paying off a small loan he'd taken to help his grandson with a deposit. Every single month, a portion of his fixed pension income went straight out the door before he'd even bought his groceries. It wasn't reckless. It was generous, but it meant his pension, which should have been entirely his own, was quietly serving someone else's future as well as his. Walter never once regretted helping his grandson, and I want to be clear, this isn't a story about regretting generosity. It's a story about the arithmetic of fixed incomes. A working salary can often absorb a debt repayment because it has room to grow through raises or promotions. A pension, by contrast, is largely fixed. Every pound committed elsewhere is a pound that will never again be available for its original purpose, keeping Walter comfortable, warm, and worry-free in his own home. If you are still servicing meaningful debt, credit cards, loans, even a mortgage, after the age of 70, that is sign number 3, and it deserves your full attention. Fixed incomes and ongoing debt repayments are a difficult combination because a pension typically doesn't grow the way a working salary might. Speaking with a debt charity or a regulated advisor about restructuring or consolidating what you owe isn't admitting defeat. It's taking back control. Many people find, once they finally make that call, that options existed the whole time that they simply didn't know to ask about. Number 4, and this is the one I promised you, the one that isn't about money at all. It's about a phone call. Dorothy, 78, from a small town in Kent, received a phone call one afternoon from someone claiming to be from her pension provider. He knew her name. He knew, roughly, the value of her pension pot. He spoke calmly, professionally, and told her that due to new regulations, she needed to transfer a portion of her pension into a new, more secure scheme, or risk losing it entirely. Dorothy, quite reasonably, was frightened. She very nearly acted on it. It was only because her son happened to visit that same evening, and something about the story didn't sit right with him, that they called her actual pension provider directly, using the number on an old statement, not the one the caller had given her, and discovered the entire call was a scam. What frightened Dorothy most, she told me afterwards, wasn't the money she nearly lost. It was how convincing the caller had been. He hadn't sounded like a criminal. He'd sounded like a helpful young man doing his job properly, patient with her questions, reassuring about her worries. That, more than anything, is what makes pensions scams so effective. They are built entirely around sounding trustworthy, because trust is the only thing standing between the scammer and your pension pot. Here is the sign. If you have ever received an unexpected call, email, or letter creating urgency around your pension, telling you to act today, to transfer now, to avoid some looming deadline, even if you didn't fall for it, the very fact that you were targeted means your information exists somewhere it perhaps shouldn't. That is sign number 4, and it means your pension is at risk not from the market, but from people. The rule that protects you is beautifully simple. A genuine pension provider will never pressure you to act immediately. Hang up, look up the number yourself, and call back. Every single time. And if you ever feel unsure in the moment, remember that saying, "Let me call you back," is not rude, and it is not a failure of manners. It is the single most powerful sentence you can use to protect yourself. Number 5. You haven't reviewed your pension since you retired. This might be the quietest sign of all, because it feels like the safest thing in the world to do nothing. Once the pension starts paying out, it's natural to think the hard work is finished. But Eileen, a retired nurse from Cardiff, discovered 11 years into her retirement that she'd been on the wrong tax code for almost a decade, simply because nobody, not her, not HMRC, not her pension provider, had ever gone back to check. It was eventually corrected, and she did receive some of it back, but the process took the better part of a year, and the stress of it, she told me, aged me more than the money mattered. Eileen's story is a reminder that the systems meant to look after us are run by people, and people make mistakes, get reassigned, retire themselves, or simply lose a file in a shuffle of departments. Nobody is watching your pension as closely as you are, because nobody else has as much reason to. If it has been more than a year or two since you sat down, even for 20 minutes, and reviewed your pension income, your tax code, and your entitlements, that is sign number 5. Retirement isn't a single decision made once. It's a relationship that needs the occasional check-in, the way you'd check in on an old friend. A short annual review, even just glancing over your tax code on a payslip or pension statement, comparing it to the year before, can catch an error long before it becomes 11 years of quiet loss. It's worth remembering, too, that your circumstances change even when your pension doesn't. A change in your health, a change in where you live, a change in who depends on you. Each of these can quietly shift what you actually need from your pension, and none of it gets noticed by a statement you never open. Now, before number 6, I want to pause and offer you the reassuring framing I promised at the start. None of what I've shared so far means disaster is coming. Every single one of these signs is reversible. Awareness is the whole battle. The people who struggle most in retirement aren't the ones who make mistakes. We all make mistakes. They're the ones who never looked closely enough to notice them in time. Number 6, money has become something your family can't discuss without tension. This is the one that divides families more than any inheritance ever will, because it usually isn't about the money itself. It's about pride, fear, and love tangled together. Consider 2 neighbors, Eleanor and Ruth, who lived 2 doors apart for over 20 years and, on the surface, had remarkably similar lives, similar pensions, similar houses, similar ages. Eleanor made a habit, every Christmas, of sitting her 2 children down for 20 honest minutes. She told them roughly what she had, roughly what she'd need, and what her wishes were if her health ever changed. It wasn't a comfortable conversation the first time. Her son fidgeted. Her daughter changed the subject twice, but by the 3rd year, it had become as ordinary as discussing the weather. Ruth, on the other hand, felt that money was a private matter, something almost embarrassing to discuss, even with her own children. "I didn't want them worrying about me," she said. And there is something deeply loving in that instinct. Most parents would rather carry a burden alone than pass it to their children. But when Ruth had a fall and needed care arrangements made quickly, her 2 children discovered they had entirely different assumptions about what she could afford, what she would have wanted, and who was meant to help with what. One assumed a care home was affordable. The other assumed it wasn't. The disagreement that followed didn't come from greed. It came from silence. Eleanor's children, when the same moment eventually came for her, simply already knew what to do because they'd known for years, and there was nothing left to argue about except how best to help. If discussing your pension, your savings, or your wishes with your family fills you with dread or has never happened at all, that is sign number 6. It costs nothing to fix except a little courage and one honest conversation, ideally somewhere calm, not in a hospital corridor during a crisis. You don't need to share every figure. Even a rough outline, spoken plainly once, saves your family from having to guess at the worst possible moment. Number 7. You're cutting back on the things that once brought you joy. This last sign is perhaps the saddest, because it often goes unnoticed by everyone except the person living it. Arthur, 81, used to take the train once a month to visit his sister 2 counties over. Somewhere along the way, without any single dramatic event, he simply stopped. When asked why, he said quietly, "I just didn't want to spend the money on something so small." But it wasn't small to him. It was one of the few things that still made him feel like himself, one of the last threads connecting him to a sister he'd known since childhood. The trouble with this kind of quiet retreat is that it rarely announces itself. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to stop living fully. It happens one skipped outing at a time, each one easy to justify, until eventually a whole life has quietly shrunk around a fear that was never properly examined. If you find yourself quietly retreating from the small pleasures, the coffee with a friend, the train ticket, the birthday gift you'd normally send without a second thought, not because you no longer enjoy them, but because a quiet anxiety about money has crept in uninvited, that is sign number 7. And it deserves just as much attention as any of the financial signs before it, because a pension that keeps you fed and housed but leaves you afraid to live is not doing its full job. So now that we've walked through all 7 signs together, I want to leave you with 3 small habits. Nothing grand. Nothing that requires an appointment with anyone. Just 3 quiet practices that the steadiest people I've spoken with all seem to share. The first habit is a monthly ritual, not a yearly panic. Pick one afternoon a month, the same one, every time, and simply look at your money. Statements, balances, anything unopened. 15 minutes, done consistently, protects you more than one long, anxious afternoon done once a year. The second habit is keeping one trusted person informed. It doesn't need to be a financial advisor. It can be a son, a daughter, a niece, or a close friend, someone who knows roughly what you have, roughly what you'd want, and who you'd call first if something felt wrong. Isolation is what scammers rely on, and it's what turns small financial mix-ups into large family disputes. A second pair of eyes changes everything. And the third habit, perhaps the gentlest of all, is giving yourself permission to still enjoy your life. Not recklessly, not without care, but genuinely. The train ticket to see your sister. The coffee with an old friend. These aren't indulgences competing with your financial security. They are, in their own quiet way, part of what that security was always meant to protect. So let's bring this together. 7 signs. Statements left unopened. Income resting on a single source. Debt still owed in your 70s. That unexpected phone call. A pension left unreviewed since the day you retired. A family that can't speak about money without tension. And small joys quietly given up. None of these, alone or even together, are a verdict on your future. They are simply signals. Gentle taps on the shoulder, asking you to look a little closer at something that deserves your attention. The habits that protect people, best in retirement, are rarely dramatic. They're small and steady, opening the post, asking a question you've been avoiding, having the conversation you've been putting off, hanging up the phone, and calling back on your own terms. Financial security in your later years isn't built from one grand decision. It's built the same way a garden is. A little tending, a little patience, season
after season,
and the occasional afternoon spent simply pulling the weeds before they take root. Before you go, I'd love to know, which of these 7 signs surprised you the most? Or which one do you recognize in your own life? Or in someone you love? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one, and I promise you, whatever you're carrying, someone reading alongside you is carrying something similar. And if this video gave you something worth thinking about today, do stay a while longer with us. Subscribe so that next time we sit down together like this, you won't miss it. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you very soon.